Hey friends, welcome back to Chat with Nat, conversations that count, where we talk real life, real money, and real strategies to build wealth without worry and a life well lived. Today's episode is brought to you by Casa de Confidence Productions. Julie and Dan Collins are a powerhouse duo that help every podcast reach their dream of sounding incredible, feeling supported, and looking professional. They're so talented at helping your voice come through clearly and confidently. So if you've ever thought, maybe I should start a podcast, go connect with them at casadeconfidence.website. Today, I am so excited. I was introduced to today's guest just a couple weeks ago in an email, and we met last week. And I'm just so excited to have Tess Cheng here with us today. She is a certified health and wellness coach with over 13 years of experience helping ambitious women build sustainable energy, focus, and resilience. With a master's in clinical nutrition from NYU, she supports entrepreneurs and high-performing professionals in creating simple habits that prevent burnout and fit real life. Tess is also a contributing author to Confident You, The Raw Conversations, where her chapter, Empower Your Path, explores sustainable habits for energy, focus, and lasting confidence. Now, my money tip for this week is your health is wealth. You can save up all the money in the world, be financially independent, be financially free, but if you don't have your health, what good is all of that money going to do for you? So as I challenge you all the time to focus on different aspects of your financial portfolio, I want you to focus on your health and the difference that makes in how you show up in the world and how you get to live your life. So Tess, I am really excited for this topic today, to have more conversation and to have you share with my audience a little bit more about yourself. So will you start by just giving us a little bit of a background of who's Tess Cheng and how did you get into the work that you do today?
Yeah, hi, Natalie. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So it goes back a long time ago when I was growing up in Hong Kong. My family was always mindful about health practices. My mom loved cooking, so she would always make us all these fresh meals. And in fact, going to somewhere like McDonald's was a treat as a child. Because my mom would say, "Oh, no, okay, you can't just go there all the time. We want to have family dinners and that, fresh food and whole foods that you can have." And she was always talking about nutrition, but when you're young, you don't really make note of it. But I remember, growing up with just wanting full meals, like having lunch, dinner, breakfast, rather than just snacking your way through. So I think, that was really quite meaningful, and it actually set a really good precedent with my eating habits. And then from there onwards, I moved to London and I discovered that I was hypoglycemic in my early 30s. But I was, I always knew I have a family history of diabetes, so I always get my doctor to check for my blood glucose level. And at that time, he warned me if I didn't change my eating habits, I may eventually develop diabetes. So that's when I started doing a lot of research, changed some of my behaviors, and then decided to move to New York to pursue my master's in clinical nutrition so I could help others be more aware, of how lifestyle changes can actually make a difference. And then I was practicing as a nutritionist for a number of years when I was living in LA. And then I switched into wellness coaching because I felt that people needed more an integrated approach. So it's not just about, eating choices, but also sleep, stress management, movement, all these things, they really integrate into your system and help your system work, smoothly. So one without the others is not going to, it's going to have a huge impact. So now I help people with their lifestyle behaviors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So, first of all, I have to tap into, you mentioned that going to McDonald's when you were a child was a treat that you had.
Yeah.
It's when you're a kid in America, it's almost an all the time thing, which is not, come on. I don't care how much you may love McDonald's or your kids may love McDonald's. It is not a healthy place for you to be going to all the time. So, that to say, the other thing I understand, or I've heard, I haven't personally experienced, but I've heard that McDonald's in other countries is very different than it is in America. My son was in the Marine Corps for 4 years and he was stationed in Okinawa. And he said, no, Mom, McDonald's there is not like, it's not just greasy junk food.
Yeah.
They have incredible options and totally different, which I guess makes sense. If you're going to cater to the people in another country, you've got to offer them different things that they're more used to. But I love hearing that you grew up in an environment that taught you it was important to have those whole foods, to have nutritious meals. But I love also that you said that your mom referenced family meals together. That was something that I had growing up. We ate dinner together as a family most nights, especially in my younger, probably up until maybe junior high or high school, when there's more activities going on for kids in the evenings and schools things. But Sundays was always family dinner. And that's a tradition that I try to carry on now. My son's a veteran now. He's out of the active duty military and he doesn't live too far away. And so on Sundays, I try to always have them over and it's time for us to share a meal, to visit. We might play card games. We might all watch a movie together, something like that, but just continuing on those memories. So I personally connected with that part that you mentioned because I think that in today's world, we probably don't prioritize that as much as maybe our parents did. And we could, to be honest with you. And I think that's a great foundation. So thank you for sharing that. Now, you mentioned you started out as a nutritionist, but you've moved over into the wellness side and really helping people find. Now, I always say true balance doesn't really exist, but harmony is what I like to call it, right? Because you may be stronger in some areas than as another, but you don't want to be way up here and way down here. So you're really, really fit, but you eat a bunch of junk, or you eat really healthy, but you still don't, build strength, mental wellness, physical wellness anywhere else. So I love that you've kind of rounded it out where you touch on all of those things. And this was something that really resonated with me when we met last week, because when I became a caretaker, I used to tell people I put myself on the back burner and I really was just focused on what do my parents need? Am I doing everything right? There's so much to learn. So much in your life is adjusting when you become a full-time hands-on caregiver. So I would say I put myself on the back burner, but about a year and a half ago, I realized I was nowhere near the stove. I wasn't on a burner that was turned off. I wasn't even close to the stove. I had lost track of my own eating habits, my own activity habits. I had put on weight. I was tired. I was lethargic. I'm also a middle-aged woman. And so I have all that nature brings to the equation at this time of life. And I knew that something had to change or I wasn't going to be able to show up for anybody. And so we talked a little bit about that. And so much of what I talk about now is caregiving. It ties into my financial business and what I do because it's important to plan for all the components. And the financial component of caregiving is next level. Just as important, if not maybe more important, I'm going to say pretty level. You've got to be prepared financially, but you also have to be prepared from a health perspective to be a caregiver. So how can caregivers take care of their own health and energy while also supporting somebody else?
Yeah. Very often, they just get overwhelmed and they just, looking at, taking care of someone and they forget about themselves. But as you said, if you get burnt out or if you just, get too tired, then you are not there for the other, for the other person. And so it would actually be helpful if you put a system in place so that it just becomes you can just fit in between whether it's sleep or your meal plans, maybe just do something in advance. Would be preparation is key, and actually schedule all these things in, and you need to have breaks too, like brain breaks from time to time, breath work or just go out for a walk, in the sun and get some sunlight exposure, and just you just have to fit. You want to look at your schedule and say, okay, I want to be present for the person I'm caring for, and so I need to look after my physical health, my mental health, and my emotional health. So if you neglect your sleep, then you're going to be tired. And I feel that it really starts with sleep, because how you sleep at night is going to affect the way you operate throughout the day and how you're going to make those decisions and whether you're going to stick with those health habits. If you wake up feeling groggy, you're not going to say to yourself, oh, I'm going to go to the gym. No, you're not, because you're tired. You just think, oh, who cares? It doesn't matter. I'm going to just have something sugary to give me some energy and just perk me up. So I would suggest, just prioritize your sleep. That also is important for your brain health in the long term. And when, looking after our brains is very important, because that's what actually gives us independence in the long run. And so, but at the same time, don't overwhelm yourself. Just don't try and do everything in one go. Just try one thing at a time, take one small step and then build it, with something else that you think, oh, maybe I will try something else today. Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Is it okay?
Okay, we'll have that part clipped out.
Okay.
What I was saying is, I love that perspective that you just shared. Just start with one thing and build from
Right.
there. Because the truth is, as a caregiver, you are responsible for everything for your person, depending on what they're going through. Now, when my parents first moved here with me 3.5 years ago, they were both much more able-bodied than they are today, especially my mother. But my mom has vascular dementia, so she has declined from a mental perspective. And you touched on how important your brain health is. It's a game changer. And I will say this too, even if you are diagnosed with a memory condition in the future, dementia, Alzheimer's, whatever it is, if you focus on keeping your brain as healthy as possible, you will slow down that progression, right? But when you become a caregiver, you've got to do everything for them. And I think that's what causes us to stop paying attention to ourselves. We're just trying to get through our day and be 100% of what our person needs. And so for you to talk about how it just has to be one little thing, even if it's, go out for a 15-minute walk every day. That helps you from a mental perspective. You get some quiet time in nature, some fresh air. It helps you to ground yourself, recenter yourself, and it gives you a little bit of exercise, right? So start with that 15-minute walk, or like you said, preparing your food ahead of time, which is something that Tess, I've got to get better at. I keep saying on Sundays, I'm not going to try and meal prep everything, but on Sundays, I'll meal prep the protein for the week. because
Sure.
that's
Yeah.
often the things that it's really easy and quick to throw
Right.
together a salad or something like,
Right.
some fresh fruit, things like that to go with the protein. The protein is what takes time. I still have
Yeah.
not fully gotten my arms around that, but I
Well,
do think it's one of the things that would help, me when it comes to meal times with my parents, and having things that we could just grab and put together really easily in case, because
right.
honestly, our days get away from us, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I love that you touched on that. Just start with one thing, but don't
Mm-hmm.
completely lose sight of yourself, which is, as I was saying, so easy to do because you're constantly trying to stay on your toes so you don't miss something in caregiving. And yet you will miss something in caregiving.
Yeah.
You will,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
perfection, it doesn't exist. I relate it for people to when you're planning a wedding. You want everything to be perfect and you're
Yeah.
so nervous that something's going to
Mhm.
go wrong. And when somebody shares that with me, I say, "Oh, I can guarantee you that something is not going to go the way you planned it on
Yeah.
your wedding. But
Yeah.
here's what you've got to remember. If at the end of the day you got married, then it was perfect.
Right.
If the cake
Exactly.
tipped over, or
Yeah.
if your ring bearer runs away with the rings,
Yeah.
or if the bride trips walking down the aisle, at the end of the
Mhm.
day, if you accomplished getting married to your person,
Right.
then it was a beautiful, wonderful day, right? So
Right. Yeah.
I think that's same way with caregiving. If you get to the end of the day and you can think, man, we got it. Maybe it wasn't perfect, but we got there. Um, then that's something to celebrate.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about the little habits like that, you kind of already
Mm.
mentioned, just do one thing at a time. What would you say? I talked about maybe going through a little bit of a walk, and we both
Yeah.
kind of touched on meal prep, but what are some other sustainable habits that caregivers can build when they don't feel like they have time to take for themselves? Maybe just tiny
Right.
little windows of time, or maybe something that could benefit them while they're also taking care of the person that they're caregiving for.
Yeah. I would say maybe first of all, stay hydrated.
Mm,
That's important because it's easy to forget about that. But always start with, 1 or 2 glasses of water first thing in the morning. And just throughout the day, remind yourself or have a water bottle with you. Because it's easy when you just, care for someone else, you forget. To stay hydrated, and you might not actually feel the thirst. And hours later, you think, oh my God, I haven't really had any water, and then you're trying to catch up in the evening. So, have a water bottle with you. The other suggestion I have for meal prep is that perhaps if there's an audio book that you like to listen to, that's a good time.
mm,
Because then that way you think, oh, I want to listen to that book, but what can I do at the same time? That would not distract me. And
yeah.
that way you get something accomplished as well. So, that's my suggestion. The other thing is, if you're really pushed on time with time, maybe just some breath work, or
Mm,
it's just some stretches, get up and move around, do some stretches, and some deep breathing exercises. Some of them can only take 5-10 minutes, if that. And this way, it gets your blood going, gets some movement going, and resets your brain.
mm,
So you're not just focusing on one thing at a time. Because when you're caring for someone, you want to actually have your energy level, stay quite, the same. You don't want to have those crashes.
yeah.
Um, and you want to be attentive to that person. So it's important to have mini breaks in between.
Yeah. Okay. I love
Yeah.
everything you said because as you were saying them, I thought there's a component of caregiving. There's a component of each one of those that fits right within caregiving. For example, my mom is much more sedentary and she sleeps a lot. So I have to be
Mm,
very focused on making sure she gets her water in, right?
yeah. Yeah.
So every time I take the cup to my mom to drink, I can just take one for myself and she and I
Yeah.
can drinking 8 ounces of water together, or have our cups there together. And every time I
Mm-hmm.
pick
Yeah.
mine up, I have her pick
Listen.
hers up, and vice versa. Even with meal prep. Now, my mom could probably do very minimal in the kitchen now, which is a little heartbreaking because her career, she was a chef's assistant. Food,
Oh.
food cooking, catering was my mom's life.
Mm-hmm.
And so it makes me sad that she
Yeah.
doesn't even remember a lot of that anymore. And in a way, maybe that's better if she can't physically do it, that she doesn't really remember.
Yeah.
But for the first probably 3 years that my parents lived here, my mom would come in the kitchen and help us with little things.
Oh. Yeah.
So I was able to keep an eye on her. I could set her
Mm.
at the bar in a bar stool and have her chop an
Mm.
onion for me while I
Mm.
was browning the hamburger or cooking the chicken or something like that for a meal.
Yeah.
So it was time we could spend doing something she still loved, but I had my eyes on her and I
Mm-hmm.
was still getting dinner ready, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
all of those things. And then I will say, since my mom had 2 hospitalizations in the last 6 weeks,
Mm.
and we've had home health coming in. So we have
Right.
PT
Yeah.
that comes in once a week. And we also had speech therapy, but it
Mm-hmm.
was for swallowing. So I guess the
Yeah.
speech
Sure.
therapist also watched that.
Mm-hmm.
And they both have talked to me about how important those deep breaths are,
Wow.
especially as we're aging, because
Mm.
our neck muscles get
Mm.
a lot weaker. Just as we
Yeah.
age naturally, we don't even have to have a diagnosis.
Right.
And so they just taught some simple, her physical therapist gave us some good breathing exercises, to
Mm-hmm.
good, long, deep breaths, hold it
Right.
for a count.
Yeah.
With my mom, I
Mm.
just hold it for a count of 3 and then
Yeah.
release it slow. And then speech therapy taught us some exercises, just the way you move your tongue and the way you can
Uh-huh.
just do the deep breathing's really good for
Mm.
keeping your neck muscles strong. I never
Uh-huh.
correlated those 2 things.
Yeah.
And so again, taking that time where you could just maybe put on some low music and just
Yeah.
do some deep breathing with the person you're
Yes.
taking care of. And then
Right.
it's
Yes.
something that you're doing together, building the
Yeah.
memories that you can,
Uh-huh.
and you're taking care of both of your wellness.
Absolutely. And it helps you to de-stress, and it's something that's enjoyable. As you say, you can do those together, which is wonderful. And this way it will also encourage your mom, to enjoy them. And it doesn't, so she wouldn't feel like, oh, it's something, that's just for me. But, but Natalie's doing that too. And it's almost like a game, that you play together.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
I think too, like I mentioned, especially, well, I don't know if especially because I've never taken care of somebody else with another life altering disease, but with dementia, you're losing your person. They
Yeah.
don't remember all of the
Mhm.
things, right? But here
Yeah.
you are making new real-time memories with them that I think are really special moments, because a lot of
Yeah.
caregiving is heavy and hard.
Yeah.
For
Sure.
example, it has gotten increasingly difficult to get my mom to bed at night, not because she doesn't want to go to bed, but physically it's very difficult. So
Yes.
we have different equipment in our home that we use, but there's still areas where she has to take a few steps. And depending on how tired her body is,
Mhm.
I'm having to fully support her
Right.
weight.
Yeah.
And Tess, I'm going to tell you, because this is leading into the next question. I stepped away last night and I told my dad, just, I had mom sitting down and I
Mhm.
said, just keep an eye on her. I have to step away for a few minutes.
Mhm.
It was so difficult and overwhelming for me that I was getting very emotional. And I
Yes.
went outside
Yes.
on the back porch and I cried
Right.
for 5 minutes.
Oh.
And then I
Yeah.
and then I came back inside and I said, okay, let's try this again.
Yes.
And then we
Yes.
finally got her to bed, and I turned off the lights and I went in the living room and I sat and cried again for a few minutes.
Mhm.
So I am not typically a crier. I think caregiving has put me in touch with my
Yes.
emotions in a different way again.
Yeah.
But I did sit there and I shed some tears and I took a
Uh,
few deep breaths and I reminded
mm,
myself who I am and why
yes.
I'm doing this work. And I
Right.
got back to it.
Right.
And then I
Yes.
and then I also ordered another piece of equipment to help with some of the
Mm,
parts,
right.
that are
Mm,
difficult for my mom. So
yeah.
I think that breathing is a game
Mm,
changer.
yeah, yeah. And very often when we're stressed, we don't breathe that well. We hold our breath and the breath becomes lighter. And so to actually be conscious about it and be intentional and do breath work is really beneficial for us. I actually started my breath work every morning, just going on the balcony. And that's what I do first thing after I
Mm,
have my water, and just for 10 minutes and go out and get some sunlight exposure, which, and then I really enjoy it. And at times, you'll find it, deep breathing will help when you get a bit emotional.
mhm,
And, and I think just by focusing on the breath, it just gives you that break that you need mentally, and just listening to your body to see what you are doing, and just hold it, or you know on the internet there's some guided breathing exercises that you can actually do. And so find one you like, something that's not so long to begin with, just try it for 10-15 minutes, and eventually you will actually get it into your system, and then you think, oh, this is hard, and every time you feel the tense moment, you think, okay, let me do some, breathing,
yeah,
that some breath work that would really help.
yeah.
You find a relief.
Yeah, and it's those little reminders, right? You're creating those habits and those little reminders.
Mm.
And for me, when I get up in the morning, it's still dark, so I don't get the sunlight yet, at least this time of year. But I will drink a 16-ounce glass of
Mm.
water first thing. I'll put my coffee
So,
on to
yeah.
go, but I have a full 16-ounce glass of water. And one thing I've started is I'm doing nitrogen water now.
All right. Yeah. Uh-huh.
And I'm using some mineral salt in my water as
Mm.
well. So I'm really getting
Right.
some of those good things in my water and
Yes.
into my body first thing. So I drink
Mm.
that whole glass of water and then I take my dogs out. And while
All
my
right.
dogs are running around, doing their
Yeah.
business first thing in the morning, I stand barefoot just on the grass right off the edge of my
Yeah.
patio. And
Uh-huh.
I'm just like, good morning, world. And I take a few
Yeah.
deep breaths. It's not anything patterned or whatever, but it's
Mm.
just, I kind of just stand up a little taller, take some
Yeah.
deep breaths, and just decide it's going to be a good day. And then
Mm.
immediately after that, I do get my coffee and then I sit down for my quiet time. I do my Bible study and my
Yeah.
journaling, and some
Mm.
gratitude
Wonderful.
practices first thing in the morning. But
Yeah.
I think where I could work on that is winding down in the evening with that as well.
Mm. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so that leads me into this last section I want to talk about with you
Mm.
today is how can caregivers let go of guilt when they take time to still prioritize their own health and well-being?
Well, that's what we were talking at the beginning. When you
Mhm.
take care of yourself, you're not being selfish. You're not just taking care of yourself. You want to stay well so that you can take care of someone else. And that's really, why it's so important that you mustn't forget about, those practices. And so, you might feel, oh, I'm just doing this for me, but you're not. You're doing it for everyone. If you're not actually, you don't have your health in place, you're not going to be able to look after someone else. And so, it's always important to remind yourself that you have to put time aside for that. And you have to say, okay, I need to start winding down in the evening, and set a time before I actually go to sleep, and to have the me time, to unwind, to start slowing down, to prepare yourself for sleep. Don't
Mhm.
forget your brain's been working all day from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed. the brain is full on. There's so many parts of life that we have to manage all the time. And especially when you are actually caregiving, it's just a lot going on, in your world. And so you
Mhm.
really have to sit back and say, no, just like all the whole system, the brain also needs to wind down. It can't be on all the time, otherwise, it's just going to get overloaded.
Yeah.
And for you to actually have a good night's sleep, it's important to have those moments when you actually wind down and start, not having all the stimulations going on. And so I would say, read a book or listen to some soothing music, breathing exercise, have a hot shower. And for the ladies, we have our beauty routine that we can
Mhm.
actually go through, and that can be quite therapeutic. And all those things, that they are important. And this way you can show up the next day and take care of the person who needs you and be there for them and have the mental capacity to look after someone.
Yeah. So I'm going to take it one step further, even than just the way you can build your routine and maybe exercising. I think there is always a little bit of guilt when you try to unplug, even if you're still in the same home, right?
Right. Yes.
There can be the guilt along with that.
Mm.
But one thing I found, so I started my health journey a little over a year and a half, well, right about a year and a half ago. And going into 2025,
Mm.
I also felt like that year prior, I had really kind of stepped back from getting out of the house, going to meet friends for coffee or lunch,
Yeah,
or even going to networking events or one day seminars that help me grow as a person or help my
yeah.
business to grow. I
Mhm.
I really, well, first of all, COVID got me very comfortable being alone, which I've always been a people person. I wanted to be out. I
Yeah,
wanted to be doing. I got
yeah,
very
yeah,
okay with being alone during
yeah.
COVID.
Yeah.
Then I became a caretaker as we were coming out of
Mm.
COVID. So for me, I didn't realize that I had really unplugged from that time with my friends and the way that they can feed my soul and my heart.
Wow.
And somebody said something to me when I said, I've got to focus on my health so I can show up for my parents. And I had a friend say to me, you also have to show up for you and let the people
Yes.
that care about you pour into you,
Right.
even
Yeah.
if it's just once a month. And so I went into
Mhm.
2025 and I said, once a month, I'm going to block out 2 hours to go meet a friend for
Yeah.
lunch. And I'm going to try
Mhm.
and do at least one coffee date with a friend, even if it's
Right.
virtual, but we're going to try
Yeah.
and go in person and meet at a coffee shop for an hour. And so I did
Right.
really good last year with that. And this year I'm like, okay, I need to stretch some more for myself.
Yes.
So, when we're talking about taking that time for your own health and well being,
Mm.
there is the obvious everyday things we've talked about.
Yeah.
Um, but can you talk a little bit about give yourself permission to also live for you, some of those
Yeah.
bigger things?
Oh, yeah. Yes. Yeah, definitely. You have to actually, give yourself permission and just see that, it is important to actually do things that you enjoy, something that, do something, that will actually bring you some joy and, give you some fun. And so this way, you can actually really show up for the others. And, it can be something small. It doesn't have to be, a big thing. And, like you said, social connection is very important to us. We're social animals. And so it's really a good idea to actually set time aside and catch up with your friends. And, support is so important when you're caregiving, support from the others, so that way you can actually have a conversation with them, and share your thoughts, and
Mm,
get the get different perspectives, and or just do something light, something enjoyable, go somewhere and check out a new restaurant. Just those moments are special. And it's important to actually fit those in and make sure you make time for them.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
for expanding on that a little bit, because I do
Yes.
think, and this is really my hot take as we round down today's episode, is caregiving by nature can become isolating.
Yeah.
And it is so important that we don't allow that to happen, because I compare it to, when you start coming into midlife, depending on what age you were when you had your kids, right? There comes a time that you become that empty nester. And if you've been that nurturing parent, whether you're a mom or a dad, you've been that nurturing parent, you've gone to all their games, all their school stuff, and now they spread their wings to fly.
Yes.
And that's what you want for them. And yet we go through a little bit of an identity. I don't know if I'm going to call it an identity shift. For some people, I know it's very big, and they would call it an identity crisis, but I'm going to call it an identity shift. And we're trying to figure out, okay, so who is Natalie now? I've raised my son. He's off in the Marine Corps doing his thing. Like, who am I? What's important to me? What do I want to do next? And so we go through this shift maybe for a few years. And then if you step into caretaking, whether you're full-time hands-on caregiver like myself, or you're a support caretaker of some kind, you step into that other role. And if you allow yourself to get lost in that role, to become isolated, you then have to go back through that identity shift again.
Right.
And it also can make that role of caregiver much more difficult, because you feel alone, you feel isolated. You haven't nurtured those relationships and had those conversations where it's comfortable maybe to ask for support and help when you need it.
Yeah.
And so you just think, I'll figure it out as you're falling apart. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So on that note, Tess, as we wind down this episode, what's one more thing that you'd like to share with the listeners? Maybe around this conversation of caretaking and well-being as a whole. And then also, how can they find you and connect with you?
All right. Yeah. Thank you. I would suggest that when you are caregiving someone, it's really important to be mindful of those, of having some health practices in place, and actually make sure that you actually do try and fit them in, and even that there are days when they might be a bit overwhelming, and if it's try maybe something like an activity you enjoy doing, an outdoor activity, that do it with a friend. This way, as Natalie, you just said, caregiving can be isolating. So this way is something you can do with a friend, and it's good for you, and something you will enjoy, and also this way actually ensures that you take time out from caregiving, and so, that would be good for your physical health, your mental health, your emotional health. And you have someone you can talk to, someone you can have a conversation, rather than just keeping all those thoughts inside. Maybe something that's bothering you, or something that you're celebrating. It's actually good to talk to someone, to have someone there, and keep those connections going. And that's what I would suggest, so, yes, as we do feel guilty from time to time, but self-care is not selfish. We need to look after ourselves. We have to make sure our health is in place. It is the foundation, of what we do. And for those listeners, who would like to know more about me, they can go on my website, which is glowwithtess.com, and it's spelled GLOWITHTESS. And I'm on social media platforms, on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. The handle is the same all across, Glow with Tess. So check me out. I'm always posting health and wellness tips and some inspirations. So you can always follow me.
Yes, absolutely. Please reach out to Tess. And the truth is, health and well-being is different for anybody, or different for everybody, is how I should have said that.
Yes.
Not anybody, for everybody. You could have 100 caregivers in a room, and where we need to focus on our well-being could be different, let alone when you just talk about individuals in the world. And caretaking is not just taking care of an older loved one. You are a caregiver if you're a parent. If you're responsible for the health and well-being of anybody else, you are caregiving. And it's important to fill your cup so that you can pour over into theirs. But you can't let your cup get empty in the meantime. And that's coming from somebody who literally did exactly that for about 2 years recently. So Tess, thank you for being here. I hope y'all reach out to her. We will put your website in the show notes so people can find you that way as well. And I want to challenge you guys this week, please focus on one thing you can do based on what we talked about today to improve your well-being. Just one thing that you can work on every single day this week to focus on improving your personal well-being, and then take one step at a time, as Tess mentioned in the beginning of this episode, to build from there. If you know a caregiver who can benefit from this episode, please share it with them. And you, of course, can follow me on Instagram at Natty Kime, or on Substack, Chat with Nat, to get more information about caregiving and the financial components of that, which is what I do. Again, I want to thank you guys for being here this week. I am going to tease next week. I'm going to have an episode with a business partner of mine and a former caregiver, Steve Kent, talking about the importance of planning for the financial expenses in addition to retirement when it comes to aging. So I'm excited for that episode to come back, but thank you for being here. And as always, take care of you, take care of your loved ones, and protect your wealth.